Hey guys, welcome to the Troy Gramling podcast. I am so glad you decided to tune in today and to listen on all the major platforms, or you can watch in video format on our YouTube channel. So be sure to check it out and pass it along to somebody you know. We're in a series, we're talking about communication and how we communicate with one another so as to have impact. And we thought it'd be pretty cool to look at some of the most famous speeches of all time and those who have a great sense of communicating and see what we can learn from them. So we didn't just say here are 3 points, but we just kind of really walked through each one of these speeches and pointed out some things we can learn from. And today, we're going to listen to our first preacher. We're going to listen to the Reverend Billy Graham. He became well-known and renowned in the early 50s in Los Angeles, actually, with a big tent revival that got written up in the local newspaper, and he has spoken to more people in person than any other human being that has ever lived. And so pretty interesting. We caught him on video. We're going to share that and talk about the things we can learn. So we're going to jump right in. But before we do, let me remind us of something we've seen with every single communicator. There's an awareness of where they're at and who they're speaking to. Billy Graham is no different. He's at one of his crusades. So he has set everything up the way he wants it to be set up to reach thousands of people, and he knows who's there. There are people who are Christ followers who are going to be cheering him on, and all the people that they've invited to come out and hear the good news of the gospel in hopes that they will surrender their life to Christ. So he knows that's who's out there. We're going to jump right in, and here's the thing I want you to notice as we listen to this first clip. As he's going to speak with confidence and authority. There is no hesitation. Let's begin.
What was he? That's the question. Jesus Christ, who are you? Who is Jesus? We can't escape him. We try to run from him, but there he is. He keeps popping up everywhere. Our greatest philosophers write about him. Our greatest historians write about him. Our greatest poems and plays are about him. Our greatest architecture is about him, even in the Soviet Union. You go to the Kremlin.
Well, so again, he speaks with a great amount of confidence and authority, and he asks a question to set the theme. And that's pretty interesting, isn't it? This theme of who is Jesus is going to be seen throughout his whole talk. And yet, he doesn't make a statement, let me tell you who Jesus is. He asks a question, because immediately there's a vulnerability in that, and there's a humility in that, right? I want to invite you in, and together, we're going to discover who he is and why that matters along the way. But the first time I listened to this, I was amazed at how what a sense of authority he had. Now, why do you think that is? Well, it's not just because it's effective. Remember, he knows who he's talking to, and he set it up in the way he desired in order to communicate. So he has a lot of confidence walking into here, saying, I know what I'm going to talk about, I know how I'm going to say it, and I know who I'm saying it to, which is a lot different if you walk into an environment where you didn't set anything up and you're not exactly sure where the people you're talking to are. So, and he does it, this authority comes across with a sense of tone, doesn't it? All right. Now, here's the next thing you're going to notice. So he comes in and he asks a question to set a theme. And then, who is Jesus? He's going to get everybody in the audience to agree with where he's going to start. Okay. I put it like this. He's going to get agreement to the question, where or who is Jesus? So let's jump to the second clip.
Jesus was completely human. He was representative of man because the Bible says he was identified, he was numbered with the transgressors. We know that he was hungry. We know he got thirsty. We know he got tired. We know that he had the joys of friendship. We know that he wept at the tomb of a dead loved one. We know that he had all the characteristics of a man.
Right, so you notice he asked a question. Remember, he sets this theme up, not by making a statement, by asking a question. And then as he begins to answer the question, he begins at a place where the vast majority of people can agree. Maybe you don't believe that Jesus was God, but we all believe he was a man, and a man that existed. And in doing so, he kind of pulls everybody in, right? Because the question itself, who is Jesus, could push people away, or it could divide people right off the bat. Well, I know what he's going to say, and I know how he's going to respond, but he doesn't, does he? He starts at a place of unity. And if you're communicating to a group of people, that's always important, because there's always things that you can't agree on, or I won't say always, the vast majority of times, there are things you can agree on. And that's an important place to start. Sometimes in our skin, we want to start right with the area of conflict, because that's what's got to be fixed, right? That's what's got to be corrected. But often if we start there, we push the people we're trying to convince so far away, they never hear our arguments for why they should change, or why they should listen to what we have to say. Billy Graham, who's spoken to millions upon millions of people all over the world, all types of people, and yet we all tend to respond the same when it comes to a question that we begin to answer in our mind long before the communicator answers it. And he kind of pulls us all in and gets a sense of agreement. What a great place to start. You're going to be talking to your kids. You're going to be talking to a group of people, a management team, whoever it is. And you know that the question you're going to answer isn't necessarily going to have an agreement at the beginning. In other words, you're going to have to convince some people that what you're communicating is the truth, or it's the best idea, or it's what we need to do. Rather than start with the place of contention, got to get to that. Can't have a change of mind without talking about the place of contention. But we can begin with agreement. And that's what Billy Graham does, and that's what all successful communicators do. Now he's going to connect with his audience, right? So he's pulled us all in and said, hey, we can all agree Jesus is a man. And then he's going to say, I'm just like you. I know I'm on the platform, or I know I have the position, whatever the situation in which you're communicating might be. I know I'm the parent, but let me tell you, not only can we all agree that Jesus is a man, right? We can all agree about who I am. So we're going to see his vulnerability. And we will look at clip number 3.
Now, wouldn't that be something for a man to come along, 33 years of age, and say, who of you have ever seen me commit a sin? Well, I'll tell you, if I said that, all my team would jump straight up and say, I have. My wife's here.
And of course, we know what he's basically saying, right? He's saying, my wife's here. She knows I'm a sinner. I'm not perfect. I've screwed up numerous times. So he asks the question. He's going to go back to it. We're going to see again and again and again, who is Jesus? And then he states something we can all agree on, whether you believe he's God or not. He is a man. He existed in history. This is who he was as a man. And then he begins to transition to the fact that he was a perfect man. And he's going to talk about how rare that is. And again, to keep them going along with him, because if you're trying to convince somebody of something, you want them to go as far as possible with you in the journey. And so how does he do that? He does that by relating to the audience, right? By being vulnerable. Hey, if I were to say I was perfect, look, my whole staff's here, they would immediately jump up. My wife's here. I mean, nobody knows me more than my wife. And she would immediately jump up and say, hey, he's not perfect, right? And that, again, makes somebody relatable as opposed to someone who has already come across with great authority and competence, but a sense of humility, because he makes himself vulnerable, saying, I'm not perfect, okay? And again, these are just things that we need to remind ourselves of as we're communicating. Maybe I'm incredibly competent, and I immediately want to rush to that place of contention so I can get you to change your mind or to agree with me or to go with me to this new destination. But along the way, I want to start with what we can agree on already. We may not even be aware of it, may not even thought of it, but we can already agree on it. And then I'm going to present myself. Yes, I'm confident, but I'm humble, right? I'm vulnerable. I'm going to reveal to you my imperfections, the areas that I need to work on. And then he's going to begin to answer the question that he started with from the very beginning. Who is Jesus? So let's go back to clip number 4.
One day he asked his disciples, "Who do men say that I am?"
See, back to the theme.
And Peter answered and said, "Well, some of them say you're John the Baptist come back, or you're Jeremiah, or you're Elijah." He said, "I'm really not interested in what the people say. I'm interested, Peter, in what you say. What do you say?" Peter said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus said, "Peter, you've done well. You've passed your examination. But Peter, those are not your thoughts. Those thoughts came from God. It has been revealed to you by God."
Right, so now he's going to start to answer the question, and he knows that this is the place of contention. While there's some who might agree, okay, Jesus, he existed, he was a man, he said that he lived a perfect life, different from us, but now he says he's God, right? And he's beginning to point out the differences, and then he's going to begin to tell us why that is, why it's important, how it makes a difference, right? He's starting to make his case. But notice the amount of time he's taken to get to the place to where he's actually going to start to answer the question and make the case for who Jesus is. And when we're communicating, and this is just a great formula to follow, is to bring people along. You got to answer the question, right? Because there's going to be no change. You're not going to see folks move in the direction you're hoping to convince them to move in if you don't eventually bring up that place of contention. And he does. And then he's going to restate the theme. So you notice he said, and Jesus asked himself, right? "Peter, who do you say that I am?" And then Peter says, "You are God." Okay. Now he's going to dive deeper into that. He hasn't even said in this moment directly, right, that with that same confidence that he began the teaching with, that who Jesus is. So he starts with, here's what Peter says Jesus is, and then he's going to answer that question with more depth and therefore authority. So notice how he does this.
Jesus Christ claimed to be the Son of the living God. And you know, at his incarnation,
said he was.
or his birth, that was not his birth, or that wasn't the beginning, that wasn't the origin of Jesus. That was the beginning of his incarnation. Because he has always existed. From everlasting to everlasting, he is God, the Bible says. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. In other words, the Logos, the Word of God, the eternal God, became flesh in the person of Jesus Christ and lived like a man among us.
Looking right into
That's what the Bible teaches. And when you come to Jesus Christ, you have to accept that. He wasn't just another revolutionary. He wasn't just another hippie. He was not just another great man. He was God in the flesh.
So again, he is going to answer the question. He just restated it once again. Who is Jesus? And then he says, well, this is who Peter said Jesus was. Now he's saying this is who Jesus says that he is. And he's going to give evidence to the fact that this is who he said that he was. And if you go back and you listen to his whole teaching, you'll see that Jesus said he was God, and as God, he had authority. That's how we know that Jesus was who he said he was. He had authority over nature, and he's going to give an example. And he had authority over disease. He's going to give an example. And he had authority over demons. He's going to give an example. And he had authority over death, and he's going to give an example. So now he's beginning to make the case of who Jesus said that he was. And the whole reason that you ought to believe that Jesus is who he said he was is going to be based upon the case that he's making right here. So he's being really, really intentional. Again, he's brought everybody along. They've seen his vulnerability. They've seen his sense of authority. As I mentioned, if you get an opportunity to watch it on video, he looks right into the camera at the exact time because he knows, one, where he's at. He knows who he's speaking to in the audience, but he also knows who's on the other side of the camera. Right? He knows who's tuning in on television and on the big screens there in the stadium in which he finds himself. So now he's going to connect the answer to the question, who is Jesus, to the audience. Right? So he's connected it to himself. He's given a sense of vulnerability. He said, this is who Jesus said that he was. And now he's going to say, and this is how it connects to you. This is why this question is important. This is why you came. And again, when you and I are communicating, we may not be preaching to thousands upon thousands of people. We may be just talking to our children, or we may be communicating to our office staff, or we may be communicating to an executive team or something in that sense. But it's the same formula, right? To continue to go back to this idea that people are going to remember what it is that you wanted to convey. Who is Jesus? And this is who this person that says that Jesus is. And this person says that Jesus is. This is who Jesus says that he is, and here's the proof behind it. And we do the same thing. So let me go to the next clip. Flip the number.
How do you explain Jesus? Jesus Christ, are you what you say you are? You know, they only brought 3 charges against him to crucify him.
Right? So he asks the question, Jesus, are you who you say that you are? And then he's going to restate the theme to why this is important. And I just want to go right on to that.
And then, on the cross, he said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And then he dropped his head and said, it's finished. What did he mean? He meant your plan of salvation was finished. God can now forgive you of all your sins because Jesus had finished God's plan for your salvation. Because you see, God knows every one of you by name. He has the hairs of your head numbered. God looks upon you as though you were the only person in the whole universe. He sees you and you alone. And on that cross, Jesus had the capacity to think of you. And he loved you enough to stay on the cross. Was there ever such love as that? When he could have been rescued and taken back to heaven and to sit on his throne, but he didn't. He said, no. I'm doing it for the joy that is set before me.
To the audience. This is why this is important. Jesus, who is Jesus? Well, he is God. And the fact that he is God is important to you. Why? Because he died for you. He loves you. He cares about you. This is personal. And this is important for you. And that's a part of communication that we can't leave out. We can't forget to communicate to people why what we're asking them to do is important to them. Not just why it's important to the organization or why it's important to you or me as the leader or as parents, but why it's important to you to move in this direction, to give this some thought, to journey with me. And again, he does a great job. And if you listen to the whole teaching, you'll see him do it over and over. And then he's going to restate the thing. Who is Jesus? And he's going to say, this is not only why it's important to you, but this is who he is to me. So it's kind of that, a lot of marketing, they'll say, kind of call it the Tide promotion, right? I tried Tide. It was awesome. You should try Tide too. And that's kind of what Billy Graham does here. It says that this is not only important to you, who Jesus is, But let me tell you the difference it's made in my life. And again, this vulnerability, this sense of personal connection keeps people connected. Because at the end of the day, isn't that what communication is? It's you and I staying connected and actually hearing one another so that we can learn, or that we can change our minds, or, that we can go on a journey together. And if you think about the teenage son that you want to communicate to, or you think about your office team that you want to communicate to, or maybe you're a coach and you're coaching team. And no matter what you're communicating, you're still walking down this same road, continuing to restate over and over and over again, what's important? Who's Jesus? And that is really important. You know what? There are parts of that we can all agree on. And there are parts of that we may disagree on, but it's important that we talk about it. And it's important to you. And here's why it's important to you that we talk about answering this question, because remember, we started with a question. And then here's how it's important to me as well.
Jesus Christ is alive. And if he's not risen from the dead, if he's not alive, then there is no such thing as Christianity. We're yet in our sins, Paul said, and the whole thing's a farce. Forget it.
Again, why is this so important? Well, it's so important because if who Jesus says he is not who he is, then none of it matters. So this question is important. And again, just a great job of communicating over and over and over again. I'm just going to talk to you about one thing. I'm going to talk to you about who Jesus is. And I'm going to go at it from every different perspective. Another preacher who does this really well is Joel Osteen. He gives basically a one idea teaching, and he says it from every direction, and he comes at it, in every different way, but he continues to bring up that one point over and over again. This is why it's important. This is why you need to listen. Kind of taking you on that journey.
Jesus Christ is alive. And if he's not risen from the dead,
notice,
if he's not alive, then there is no such thing as Christianity. We're yet in our sins, Paul said, and the whole thing's a farce. Forget it.
And again, if you're listening, you can't see it, of course, but he just kind of flips his wrist. If he's not who he said he is, it doesn't matter. Again, what's he doing? He's bringing agreement, right? In other words, this doesn't matter. It's not important if the question is answered. And then just a couple more thoughts here, and we'll wrap this thing up. But he's going to restate the theme, and like I said, he's going to continue to make this more and more personal. Why? Because at the end of the day, he wants a decision to be made. He's driving towards a decision, contention. He knows that there are people in the audience that may have some kind of concept or thought or their own answer to who Jesus is. That's where he started, right? We are all agreement on this. And then he begins to move them to who Jesus said he was, why that's important, how it's impacted his life. And,
if I had no proof whatsoever, no scientific proof that Jesus ever lived, I still would trust him because of what he's done for me. The joy and the peace and the security and the love that he's given to me, his grace that is mine today.
So again, part of his argument is who Jesus says he is important. And the fact that he says he's God, I got to tell you personally, it's impacted my life. And so even if there's no evidence for the argument I'm making, I'm going to make this argument to you. It's impacted me. It's changed my life. He's not saying there's not any evidence. He's just saying it doesn't matter at the end of the day, because who Jesus is so impactful that it's changed my life. And again, when we're talking to people, we get the same, it's important to communicate that same sense of urgency, right? At the end of the day, if I'm trying to move people, or I'm trying to change their mind, or I'm trying to get them to do something, I'm going to begin, I want to be vulnerable. I'm going to give them the facts, right? This is why you should believe this. I'm going to say, here, I got to tell you, even if that weren't true, this has changed me. And I think it'll do the same for you. And then he takes everything he said and he uses an old C.S. Lewis. I gave this argument when it came to apologetics years and years ago, but it still is very effective. Who does Jesus say he is? And it matters who Jesus says he is, because who he says he is can, it can give credence to truth or to fiction. Let's listen to this old C.S. Lewis.
Who art thou, Lord?
Right, there's the question. Again.
Jesus Christ, are you who you say you are? This is the question that every one of you today are going to have to answer.
Right.
Who
Very
is
personal,
Jesus?
Very confident.
If Jesus claimed to be God knowing he wasn't God, then he's a liar. And we will have to say, Jesus, you're a liar. You're a fraud and a hoax, and you're the biggest fraud in the history of the human race. Or, if Jesus thought he was God and did not know the difference, then he desperately needed mental help. He needed several psychiatrists. The third alternative is that he was who he claims to be, God in the flesh. I believe that the evidence is overwhelming that he is who he claims to be, the Son of the living God.
Looking right into the camera as he says that. The old apologetic argument is that Jesus is either a liar, right? Isn't that what he said? Okay, who does Jesus say he is? Well, he says he's God. Well, if he knows he's not, then he's a liar. And why should anybody listen to him? Because, see, we've already agreed that Jesus was a man, that he was a good man. He was a good teacher, right? He's walked us down this journey in the areas that we agree. And he's basically saying, well, if we agree on this, well, then doesn't it naturally make sense that these other facts are true as well? So he's a liar if he knew he was God and he knew he wasn't God and said he was God. Why would anybody want to follow? He's certainly not a good man. Or he's a lunatic. Or he says he's God and doesn't know he's not God. He's just crazy. Again, if that's the case, then why in the world would 2,000 years later we want to be following anything that he says that he is? So that if he's not, we've already agreed. We've already, right? He's already taken us down this road for the last 15 minutes. He's not a liar and he's not crazy. So there's only one other option. He must be exactly who he said he was. He must be Lord. And what then are you and I going to do with the question, who is Jesus? And then, of course, if you watch all of the show, you'll see that he then gives an invitation. If he's Lord, then you need to do A, B, or C, and it's time to respond. And the same thing is true when we communicate. We move people along a path in which they can follow to get them to a point to where they have to make a decision. And we've shown them the decision, the wise decision to make. And so communication is just so important. And we can take a sermon by a world famous preacher by the name of Billy Graham and learn how to be a better communicator. So I just encourage you, take some time to go back and listen again. And of course, I believe there's some incredible truth in what Billy Graham is saying, as well as thousands upon thousands of other people have responded to the truth that's in his teaching. But I also think it teaches us how to be better. If there's anything I've learned in my time on this planet, is it's the folks who know how to say what they want to say in order to get other people to understand what they're saying. It makes a big difference. So let's continue to become better communicators, and I'll see you next week, Thursday. We're going to drop another episode, in this series, and then we're going to start a brand new one. I'm excited about it. You'll have to stay tuned to find out what that is. We're on all the major streaming platforms as well as video format on YouTube. Thanks again, guys. I really do appreciate you hanging out with me and together learning how to be better communicators. We'll see you on the Troy Gramling Podcast.